The colossal, obsidian hemisphere of the unified conclave chamber pulsed with a dim, internal luminescence that struggled to pierce the dense, atmospheric pressure of the ongoing debate. Arbitrator Xylos, a being of serpentine grace whose chitinous scales shimmered with the pale, fearful green reserved only for moments of profound geopolitical uncertainty, felt the familiar thrumming resonance of the Grand Assembly vibrating through his secondary skeletal structure. The air was thick, not merely with the recycled moisture of thousands of life support systems, but with the raw, metallic tang of political apprehension, an ancient fear the conclave had believed long eradicated by their sheer technological dominance over the local quadrant. For 5 standardized cycles, they had debated the anomaly, the data artifact designated Terran Manifestation Zeta-7, and for 5 cycles, the analysis had been met with the same paralyzing blend of disbelief and intellectual horror from the foremost minds of the Vexillan hierarchy. The central dais, a swirling vortex of crystallized light suspended above the main floor, elevated Xylos slightly, granting him a panoramic view of the assembled delegates, representatives from every major client species and protectorate world that had bowed to the Vexillan hegemony across the last 3 millennia. Their colors, usually vibrant indicators of sector status and military achievement, were muted, their postures rigid with the strain of attempting to reconcile observed reality with established cosmological doctrine. The fundamental axioms upon which the conclave's entire naval defense and expansion strategy rested were being violently challenged by fragmented sensor returns originating from a fringe spiral arm occupied by a species they had generically catalogued as Designation 3 Human, a civilization granted basic spacefaring rights, but relegated to the tier of predictable, non-threatening primitives still wrestling with localized stellar conflicts and internal political instability. The irony was a biting poison in Xylos's metabolic system. "I reiterate for the 18th time," hissed Delegate Arshalk of the Strategic Materiel Division, his voice a low-frequency scrape that rattled the acoustic dampers designed to silence non-critical atmospheric vibrations. "The energy readings cited by the deep void scanners cannot be physically instantiated within the known laws of mass energy conversion, nor can they be sustained by any theoretical shielding matrix documented in the conclave archives. The hypothesis that the humans, the Terrans, have achieved stable, reactionless propulsion married to kinetic absorption fields of this magnitude is mathematically absurd. It defies the constraints of relativistic mechanics and the established limits of exotic matter compression. The sensor logs are corrupted. They must be." Arshalk's argument was the prevailing comfort blanket, woven from scientific arrogance and the deep-seated inability to accept that any species outside the conclave's developmental lineage could bypass the necessary, arduous steps of the great technological progression. Xylos lowered his elongated cranial hood, a gesture of profound seriousness recognized across the assembly. He had spent the previous 3 cycles personally reviewing the raw data packets, correlating the spectral analysis with cross-referenced astrophysical events. The data was clean, painfully, terrifyingly clean. Delegate Arshalk, the anomaly was tracked across 7 distinct inertial frames by independent orbital stations, each utilizing varied signature detection methodologies. The structural integrity analysis of the projected mass, based purely on the gravitational distortion observed, suggests an operating mass exceeding 400% of the maximum viable displacement for a single hull structure in deep space. And yet, the kinetic signature indicates acceleration gradients that should, by all rights, shred the vessel into molecular vapor. It is this dissonance that frightens the Central Command, and rightly so. This is not a corrupted log. This is an artifact that operates outside the boundaries of our understanding of asterisk possibility asterisk. A delegate from the Xenolinguistics Guild, a small, multi-limbed creature known for its meticulous adherence to procedural caution, offered a hesitant counterpoint. "Perhaps we misunderstand the nature of the construction. Could this be a complex, self-generating nebula phenomenon, a localized, temporary distortion field mimicking a structured object?" This was another thread of comforting denial the conclave was desperate to grasp. If it was natural, it was manageable. If it was artificial, it was an existential threat, demanding an immediate reevaluation of the entire geopolitical map. Xylos rejected the notion with cold, surgical precision. "The emissions profile is highly structured, oscillating within a manufactured frequency range, indicating active dire." Expected energy expenditure on a monumental scale. Furthermore, the object, the vessel, if we are to use the term, is maintaining a precise, non-Keplerian trajectory consistent with intentional vector manipulation. It is moving towards the inner ring of our sovereign space, and it is moving fast asterisk. We can no longer debate the validity of the observation. We must debate the meaning of the impossibility. The silence that followed was profound, the kind of absolute stillness that precedes cataclysm. The conclave had relied for millennia on its predictive models, its ability to calculate the rise and fall of burgeoning civilizations based on fixed physical laws. The Terrans, it seemed, had somehow stepped outside the constraints of that cosmic ledger. The single point of light on the tactical projection at the center of the chamber, representing the anomalous vessel, continued its steady, unnervingly swift advance. They had nicknamed it, unofficially and with a measure of desperate irony, the immovable object asterisk, because theoretically it should be so heavy as to be practically immovable, yet it moved with the impossible swiftness of a scout ship. The core fear, Xylos realized, was not just of the potential destructive power of such a vessel, but the complete unraveling of Vexillan intellectual superiority. If the Terrans had found a way to manipulate mass inertia at this level, what else had they achieved in their secluded, messy corner of the galaxy? Were they genuinely unaware of the fundamental protocols of galactic engagement, or were they deliberately ignoring them, emboldened by a technological advantage the Conclave could not even comprehend? A communication burst pierced the atmospheric tension, a low, rhythmic chime indicating a priority message from the Deep Watch border fleet, positioned near the Rylos Gap, the next projected waypoint of the Terran vessel. Xylos extended a sensory tendril, initiating the decryption protocol. The image that flickered into existence on the central projection was highly distorted, filtered through layers of deep space interference, but undeniably sharp in its implication. It showed the vessel. It was vast, impossibly angular, constructed of materials that absorbed ambient light rather than reflecting it, giving it the appearance of a moving void against the star field. Its scale dwarfed the accompanying Vexillan observation picket, which by conclave standards was a heavily armored cruiser. The comparison was devastating, a skirmishing cutter next to a planetary moon. The voice of Admiral Kren, commander of the Deep Watch, resonated with barely controlled shock. Arbitrator Xylos, the object, the vessel, is not responding to standard hails. Its energy signature has just modulated. It appears to be initiating a high-yield shielding sequence. We are preparing to intercept, but our predictive targeting systems are failing. They cannot map its inertial dampening field. We require immediate guidance. Should we engage with the standard deterrence protocol or initiate full retreat? Kren's question was momentous. The deterrence protocol meant firing maximal yield warning shots, a declaration of intent that could escalate the situation instantaneously from tense observation to open conflict. Xylos felt the weight of millennia pressing down. To fire upon the vessel without understanding its intent would be reckless. To allow it to penetrate the inner ring unmolested would be a catastrophic failure of defense protocol, likely resulting in his permanent removal from the arbitrator caste, perhaps even termination. The Conclave operated under the principle of preemptive security, crushing threats before they crystallized. But how do you crush an impossibility? He made his decision, recognizing the necessity of de-escalation, even if it meant projecting momentary weakness. Admiral Kren maintained distance. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage. We require time to understand their intent. Initiate the Priority 1 diplomatic channel uplink. Flood the surrounding stellar region with the highest-tier universal communication matrix. We will attempt direct, high-level contact. Inform them they are violating sovereign Vexillan space and demand immediate identification and cessation of forward movement. The tactical projection showed the Terran vessel continuing its relentless, unperturbed trajectory. It did not slow. It did not deviate. It seemed utterly indifferent to the presence of the powerful Vexillan fleet stationed strategically along the gap. This absence of reaction, this supreme confidence, spoke volumes more than any hostile maneuver could. It suggested that the Vexillan fleet was, in the eyes of the Terrans, irrelevant. The communication attempt took an agonizing 20 hours to execute, the Conclave's specialized translation matrices struggling to parse the underlying mathematical syntax of the Terran designation signals. Signals which were complex, non-linear, and utilized symbol. Like references to physics that simply did not exist in the Vexillan corpus of knowledge. When the connection finally stabilized, the chamber prepared itself for the anticipated dialogue. arrogant posturing, crude demands, or perhaps a panicked retreat from an unexpected confrontation. Instead, the response was a single, measured transmission, devoid of emotional inflection, delivered in the precise, universally recognized harmonics of the standard interstellar diplomacy language, yet carrying a weight of ethical gravity that instantly silenced the political chatter in the chamber. The image resolved, showing a single human female, identified by the overlaid data as Ambassador Alara Vance. She was seated in a stark, utilitarian environment, framed by complex, incomprehensible geometric patterns that pulsed faintly in the background. Her face was calm, tired perhaps, but radiating an internal composure that suggested absolute control. She did not look like a belligerent conqueror, but rather a weary scholar who had just solved a terrifyingly difficult problem. Arbitrator Xylos of the Unified Conclave of the Vexilin, her voice began, perfectly modulated, the translation matrix rendering the human acoustic qualities into the rhythmic, tonal complexity expected by Vexilin protocol. We acknowledge your transmission and your stated concerns regarding our presence within the contested region designated as the Rylos Gap. Let me state clearly and immediately that our intent is not hostile, nor is it related to geopolitical expansion or resource acquisition within your sphere of influence. Her immediate use of contested region, rather than sovereign space, was a subtle, almost aggressive diplomatic thrust, immediately establishing that the Terrans did not recognize the arbitrary lines drawn by the Conclave. Xylos initiated the response protocol, his image projected onto the screen opposite Vance. Ambassador Vance, your vessel is operating in violation of the Central Galactic Proximity Treaty, a foundational document recognized by every major stellar power. Furthermore, the operational capabilities displayed by the vessel, designated by your own signature transmission as *, the Sentinel of Eon *, are in direct contradiction to established safety protocols regarding mass displacement and energy density limits. Your ship is, to put it plainly, impossible. You must explain its purpose and immediately comply with our request to halt movement and submit to standard docking inspection. Vance's expression did not change. She maintained eye contact, an unnerving quality in humans as their single focal point gave away nothing. Arbitrator, the Central Galactic Proximity Treaty was drafted utilizing parameters and understandings of technology that are, regrettably, outdated. Our vessel's design is a necessity dictated by challenges the Conclave may not yet comprehend, challenges that supersede local treaty obligations. Regarding its impossibility, we assure you the vessel is demonstrably real. It is a product of focused, accelerated research into the fundamental unification of space-time, a technological progression achieved not through reckless experimentation, but through decades of careful, ethical scientific progression. We understand your fear. It stems from ignorance of the application of this technology. Her phrasing, ignorance of the application, was a diplomatic scalpel, slicing through the Vexilin assumption of superiority. They were not just technologically ahead, they were intellectually operating in a completely different conceptual space. Xylos pressed, shifting the focus to the actual threat perception. The energy signatures emanating from the Sentinel of Eon suggest the capacity for system-level devastation. A weapon of that magnitude, regardless of its stated purpose, constitutes an unacceptable destabilizing factor in the quadrant. If your intent is truly peaceful, why construct a vessel whose very existence implies overwhelming force? Ambassador Vance paused, allowing the weight of his words to settle. Her response, when it came, was profoundly philosophical, revealing a layer of Terran ethics that baffled the pragmatists of the Conclave. Arbitrator, you define the vessel by its destructive potential, because that is the only metric your civilization prioritizes when assessing advanced technological capability. We define the Sentinel of Eon * by its capacity for * preservation. We did not build it to annihilate systems, we built it to sustain them. Its power is derived from the necessity of stabilizing environments, managing catastrophic stellar events, and absorbing kinetic forces that would otherwise render entire planets uninhabitable. This impossible design is a response to an equally impossible, non-sentient threat. The Conclave delegates murmured amongst themselves, the translation struggling to capture the full nuance of the Terran concept of preservation as primary output. Vexil. On technology focused primarily on military efficiency and resource extraction. The idea of dedicating such monumental resources to pure stabilization seemed wildly inefficient and perhaps even a deliberate deception. Xylos needed proof, not philosophy. Your claims are extraordinary, Ambassador. They require demonstration. If this vessel is built for stabilization, why is it moving directly toward the heart of the Vexillan industrial nexus? We interpret this trajectory as preparatory positioning for an offensive strike. Vance finally allowed a flicker of something resembling deep weariness to cross her face. The nexus is precisely where we need to be. We have been tracking a specific, escalating energy fluctuation in the region of the Cygnus Rift, a fluctuation that indicates the imminent onset of a phenomenon we have designated the chronokinetic cascade. Arbitrator, you are about to face a disaster that will not involve weapons, diplomacy, or political maneuvering. It is a fundamental disruption of the fabric of your local reality, caused by unforeseen gravitational stress upon a dormant hypermass singularity near your primary manufacturing moon, Vexilla Prime. The conclave instantly went into chaos. Vexilla Prime was the heart of the Vexillan military-industrial complex, home to billions, and the central fabrication node for their entire fleet. Any threat to it, especially one tied to a nearby black hole singularity, was an immediate Level 1 crisis. Yet the Vexillan astrophysicists had maintained for centuries that the singularity was stable, gravitationally inert due to natural dampening fields. Your assessment contradicts centuries of Vexillan celestial mechanics. Xylos snapped, the calmness of the interaction dissolving into immediate, sharp skepticism. We have constant monitoring of the Cygnus Rift. There is no cascade. You are attempting to sow strategic panic. Your monitoring is flawed, Arbitrator, Vance stated, still utterly calm. You calculate based on stable, three-dimensional geometry. The singularity is experiencing a four-dimensional energy bleed that your sensors are interpreting as benign spectral noise. The Sentinel of Ion was built specifically to generate a temporary, localized spatial dilation field necessary to counteract this bleeding, stabilizing the singularity long enough for your people to install permanent anchors, if you choose to. If we do not act within the next 48 cycles, Vexilla Prime will be subjected to the full kinetic rebound of the singularity's temporary collapse, resulting in planetary structural failure and the loss of trillions of lives. We are offering you a shield, Arbitrator, not a sword. This was the scale reveal. The impossible battleship was not impossible because of a weapon, but because it was engineered to stabilize a black hole, a task that required energy levels that surpassed the total combined power output of several dozen star systems. The Conclave's fear of human aggression now clashed violently with the terror of impending, immediate, existential catastrophe. Xylos spent the next 24 cycles in intensive, high-tension deliberations with the unified command structure, parsing the conflicting reports. The Vexillan astrophysicists, humiliated and forced to re-examine their own data through the Terran-provided interpretive filter, grudgingly confirmed that the benign spectral noise they had been ignoring for decades indeed carried the complex, geometric signature of a four-dimensional stress fracture. The cascade was real, and it was accelerating faster than the Terrans had even predicted. The immediate political consequence was devastating. The Conclave had dedicated all its military assets to preparing for potential conflict with the Terrans, moving fleets into defensive positions that were now strategically irrelevant against an environmental disaster. Furthermore, accepting the Terran analysis meant admitting, globally, that the Vexillan hegemony's scientific foundation was profoundly inadequate, built on incomplete knowledge. In the end, survival dictated the choice. Xylos ordered the Conclave's defense fleet to stand down completely, clearing a wide operational corridor for the Sentinel of Eon Asterisk. He sent a formal transmission back to Ambassador Vance, stripped of all diplomatic formality and political maneuvering, containing only the grudging acceptance. Ambassador, we yield the operational space. The Vexillan hegemony will comply with your navigational requirements. You have 48 cycles to prove your claim. If this is a deception, the consequence will be immediate and total. Vance's reply was simple. Understood, Arbitrator. We require absolute radio silence and the immediate evacuation of all non-essential personnel from Vexilla Prime and the surrounding orbital clusters. Mass disruption of this scale carries inherent risk. We will be operating in extremely close proximity to the singularity. The operational phase began with an air of absolute dread and fascination. The Sentinel of Eon Asterisk, having traveled across vast interstellar distances at speeds deemed impossible, now decelerated with an equally impossible grace near the volatile Cygnus Rift. The Conclave deployed a ring of sensor platforms, utilizing every monitoring device at their disposal, attempting to catalog the mechanics of the Terran vessel. The impossibility of the battleship was further amplified upon close inspection. Vexillan engineering relied on external armor plating, kinetic projectile redundancy, and large, visible thruster arrays. The Sentinel of Ion had none of these visible features. Its hull was a continuous fractal weave of dark material, seeming to shift and flow into itself, absorbing rather than reflecting all energy signatures, rendering laser targeting utterly futile. It was silent, emitting no exhaust, utilizing propulsion technology that seemingly compressed and unfolded space itself around the vessel, pushing against the fundamental curvature of the universe rather than relying on internal energy release. The moment the Asterisk Sentinel achieved its stabilization position, a horrifyingly close proximity to the Singularity's accretion disk, the true scale of its internal energy matrix became apparent. The vessel did not fire a weapon, it simply exhaled. From the core of the battleship, a field expanded, not violently, but with smooth, deliberate control. This was the spatial dilation field Vance had described. It was a massive, shimmering sphere of displaced reality, rendering the space within its confines utterly static, completely impervious to external gravitational influence. The field required an incomprehensible energy input, causing the vessel's already monumental power signature to spike to levels that instantly overloaded the primary Vexillan observation array, melting the sensor crystals. Xylos watched the remaining, degraded visual feed from the conclave chamber, gripped by a primal terror that transcended political fear. They were witnessing a species not merely utilizing the laws of physics, but rewriting them. The chronokinetic cascade, already manifesting as terrifying temporal distortions around the singularity, attempting to tear time and space apart, hit the dilation field and simply vanished. The energy of the collapse was not deflected but absorbed into the Terran field, stabilizing the singularity instantly, locking it into a temporary state of absolute gravitational equilibrium. The conclave's scientists, monitoring the real-time stabilization data, were reduced to stunned silence. The crisis was averted instantaneously by the deliberate application of physics the Vexillan civilization considered science fiction. The impossible battleship had performed an impossible feat. The aftermath was more complex than any military confrontation could have been. Vexilla Prime was safe, the infrastructure secured, and the imminent catastrophe averted. But the Vexillan hegemony was left reeling, not from physical damage, but from psychological and political dissolution. The realization of their own technological plateau, combined with the profound ethical maturity displayed by the Terrans, forced a necessary, painful introspection. Arbitrator Xylos convened a personal, highly private diplomatic meeting with Ambassador Vance, conducted across a secured, dedicated quantum channel that ensured absolute privacy, a rare move in the normally transparent, public-facing governance of the conclave. "Ambassador Vance," Xylos began, his voice gravelly with exhaustion and shame. "You have saved Vexilla Prime and undoubtedly saved trillions of Vexillan lives. I offer the formal gratitude of the unified conclave. We underestimated your capability, and we misread your intent. We were prepared for conflict, and you delivered salvation." Vance accepted the apology and the gratitude with the same unwavering, calm demeanor. "We do not require gratitude, Arbitrator. We require understanding. Your civilization viewed the Sentinel of Eon Asterisk as a threat because you have only ever built ships of that scale for war or domination. We built it because we were once, like you, limited by our understanding, and we paid a heavy price for that limitation." "You speak in riddles," Xylos pressed, attempting to understand the philosophical underpinning of their power. "A vessel requiring that much power, the resources required to simply maintain it must be astronomical. Why this level of dedication to planetary stability? Why not focus on sustainable, localized energy solutions?" Vance leaned forward slightly, her demeanor shifting from the professional diplomat to the philosophical chronicler. "Arbitrator, what you witnessed today was not the pinnacle of Terran defense strategy. It was a utility vehicle, a mobile crisis response unit. You asked why we invested so heavily. It is because we learned that the universe is fundamental. Lie hostile, but not in the way you perceive. The true existential threats are not other civilizations. They are the fundamental, entropic forces of the cosmos that seek to reclaim all organized matter." She began to elaborate on the deep-seated history of Terran civilization, a history that resonated with genuine suffering and costly lessons. She spoke of the Great Collapse, a period in Terran history centuries past, when their initial high-energy physics breakthroughs had destabilized localized stellar systems they were inhabiting, leading to massive, unplanned stellar events. Events similar in scale to the Cygnus Rift cascade, but accidental and self-inflicted. We destroyed two of our own colonial systems through arrogance and scientific hubris, Vance explained, the emotional resonance finally cracking her professional facade. We operated without the ethical constraints demanded by such power. The Sentinel of Eon Asterisk is a monument to that failure. Its power is not a luxury, it is a burden. Every joule of energy it contains is dedicated to ensuring we never accidentally trigger such a catastrophe again, and that we can mitigate such natural disasters when they occur elsewhere. Xylos began to understand. The Terrans were not merely advanced, they were ethically calibrated by self-inflicted tragedy. Their power stemmed not from military conquest, but from profound responsibility born of immense failure. Their impossible battleship was not a declaration of war, but an oath of stability sworn to the cosmos. You said this technology was achieved through accelerated research, Xylos noted, connecting the dots. How? The standard progression dictates centuries of incremental steps before achieving stable control over reactionless drives and dimensional stabilization fields. Vance smiled faintly, a gesture of profound melancholy. We did not accelerate, we simply reorganized. The greatest barrier to technological progress is not computation, it is collaboration. The Terran species realized that internal political fragmentation was consuming the resources and intellectual capacity needed to solve the truly difficult problems of cosmic physics. We underwent a period of global political consolidation, not conquest, but voluntary unity driven by the sheer existential dread of the universe's chaotic indifference. She summarized the core of HFY philosophy without using the specific terminology. Unity under threat leads to exponential capability. The Vexillan hegemony, for all its power, was built on forced conformity and the suppression of client species. The Terran unified mandate was built on voluntary, painful, necessary intellectual and social cohesion. This revelation was the second seismic shock to the conclave. The Terrans were powerful because they were unified. The Vexillan Empire was rigid and fragile because it was built on a foundation of suppression. The conclave, under the strained guidance of arbitrator Xylos, initiated the painful process of reevaluating its relationship with the Terran unified mandate. The immediate priority was leveraging Terran knowledge to secure the Cygnus Rift singularity permanently. This led to a period of intense, unprecedented scientific exchange, where Vexillan researchers, accustomed to dictating terms, were forced into the position of humble students, attempting to decode the Terran mathematics. During one of these technical briefings, conducted aboard the Sentinel of Eon Asterisk itself, within the vast, echoing interior of its primary power core, Xylos witnessed the operational rhythm of the human crew. They were few, highly specialized, and moved with a calm, almost meditative efficiency. There was no military hierarchy visible, only one dedicated to technical execution. While observing the core mechanics of the spatial dilation generator, a Vexillan physicist, Delegate Jathar, nervously questioned a human engineer about the vessel's ultimate capacity. "Engineer," Jathar asked, his voice trembling slightly in awe of the technology surrounding them, "you speak of environmental mitigation. Is the Sentinel of Eon Asterisk capable of replicating this dilation field on a larger scale? Could it, for example, sustain a field large enough to protect an entire populated stellar cluster?" The human engineer, a quiet, focused individual named Kai, paused his monitoring sequence and looked up. "Technically, yes, the core capacity is there. However, the energy cost is prohibitive for sustained use. We built this ship to handle local singularities and rogue gravitational anomalies. It is optimized for precision stabilization." "Then what?" Xylos interjected, his ancient curiosity overruling his diplomatic reserve. "Is designed to handle a stellar cluster. If the threat is cosmic entropy, surely your people have conceived of a defense commensurate with the scale of the galaxy." Engineer Kai hesitated, glancing towards a massive, sealed portal at the rear of the power core chamber. A P. Ortal Xylos had previously assumed led to a standard auxiliary engine room. "Arbitrator, the Sentinel of Eon Asterisk is, as Ambassador Vance stated, a crisis response unit. It is the proof of concept for the technology, but it is not the full implementation." Kai pressed a recessed sensor panel near the sealed portal. The heavy mechanisms ground open, revealing not an engine room, but a vast, terrifyingly empty space. The visual stabilizers compensated immediately, showing the conclave delegation the object stored within the sealed area. a single, small, incredibly dense metallic cylinder floating in a field of perpetual energy transference. It was roughly the size of a standard Vexilon fighter craft, but its presence caused a subtle, pervasive spatial distortion in the chamber itself. This, Kai said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, is the reason the Asterisk Sentinel exists. This is the seed. It is a proto-device containing the condensed programming necessary to initiate a full-scale Aeon array. This small device, when deployed and connected to sufficient stellar energy sources, is designed to generate a permanent, multi-layered spatial stabilization field capable of encompassing hundreds of inhabited systems. A protective sphere designed to buffer against the large-scale gravitational waves and temporal stresses inherent in deep galactic physics. The sheer scale of this ambition paralyzed the Vexilon observers. The impossible battleship was merely the delivery system for a device meant to construct an interstellar megastructure of defense, a defensive umbrella spanning entire arms of the galaxy. The Conclave had spent millennia fighting over planets and trade routes. The Terrans were building defensive structures against the slow collapse of the universe. Xylos felt a sudden, crushing perspective shift. The Vexilon hegemony, with its massive fleets and tyrannical control, was focused on local squabbles. The humans, having learned their lesson centuries ago, were playing a different game entirely, one where the opponents were fundamental forces of nature. The political fallout stabilized into reluctant alliance. The Conclave, realizing the magnitude of the shared cosmic threats and the necessity of Terran expertise, dismantled its aggressive positioning. Arbitrator Xylos, now operating as the unified voice of the Conclave, began the complex, arduous task of integrating Terran physics and ethical philosophy into Vexilon doctrine. The fear was replaced by a kind of awed, productive humility. The alliance was formalized. The unified Conclave would provide access to vast, untapped stellar energy sources necessary for the construction and powering of the first Aeon array. The Terran Unified Mandate would provide the core technology and the ethical oversight necessary to ensure the technology was used purely for preservation. It took several Terran years, a prolonged period of diplomatic tension, cultural clashes, and profound scientific breakthroughs. The Sentinel of Aeon Asterisk, having delivered the initial proto-device, remained stationed near the Cygnus Rift, serving as the central calibration hub and a perpetual symbol of Terran capability and intent. During this period of intense collaboration, a deeper relationship formed between Xylos and Ambassador Vance. They met frequently, not merely for tactical discussions, but for philosophical debate on the nature of civilization and survival. Xylos learned that the Terran drive was rooted not in confidence, but in profound anxiety, the recognition that survival was never guaranteed, only earned through perpetual vigilance and innovation. Arbitrator, Vance explained one cycle while observing the gradual, methodical construction of the stellar energy siphon necessary for the array. We do not fear other civilizations as much as we fear stagnation. If we stop learning, the universe will simply erase us. The threats are ceaseless. The entropy accelerates. Power is not ownership. Power is the perpetual responsibility to protect that which is fragile, which includes all life. This ethical framework resonated deeply with Xylos, who had long felt the sterility of the Vexilon power structure. The rigid hierarchy prized stability over innovation, a pathway the Terrans had demonstrated was ultimately fatal in the grand cosmic scheme. The Aeon Array project approached its final stages. The proto-device, now amplified by the captured energy of a dedicated, stable star, was prepared for activation. The Conclave and Terran forces positioned themselves near the proposed expansion zone, a vast, uninhabited nebula on the furthest fringe of Vexilon space, deemed ideal for testing the array's shielding capacity against localized stellar radiation bursts. The final activation sequence was a solemn event, watched by the combined leadership of the Unified Conclave and the Terran Mandate. The engineering teams coordinated across the vast distances, initiating the quantum that would transfer the condensed programming from the Sentinel of Aeon Asterisk to the stellar-powered proto-device. Xylos stood beside Vance on the bridge of the Asterisk Sentinel Asterisk, the massive panoramic view displaying the deep void where the proto-device hummed, ready to expand its protective field. "Ambassador," Xylos stated, watching the delicate dance of energy transfers, "you have forced us to redefine every parameter of our existence. We are indebted to your foresight, even if it was born of your own tragic past." Vance nodded. "The debt is irrelevant, Arbitrator. We are merely ensuring our mutual continued existence against the darkness. This field will protect against the known threats, gravitational distortions, high-energy particle bursts, and localized temporal collapse. It is strong enough to weather any storm we have encountered thus far. The central proto-device flared, a blinding burst of white light that quickly stabilized into the familiar, shimmering boundary of manipulated space. The first Ion array was operational, generating a protective sphere that instantly neutralized a distant, minor supernova radiation wave, a wave that would have sterilized several unprotected worlds. The cheers of the Vexillan observers were muted by the sheer relief. They were shielded. But as the array stabilized, achieving its intended equilibrium, something unexpected, something ancient and terrifying occurred. The massive, stable dilation field, acting as an unintended cosmic antenna, focused an extremely faint, highly structured signal that had been drifting through the interstellar medium for untold millennia, a signal too weak and geometrically complex to have been detected by conventional Vexillan or Terran sensor arrays. The stability of the Ion array, however, provided the perfect medium for amplification. The signals flooded the bridge of the Sentinel of Eon Asterisk, overloading the communication banks with a cascade of information that was neither audio nor visual, but pure, complex mathematical data woven into an intricate narrative structure. The human engineers froze, their calm shattered by the sheer volume and complexity of the received data. Xylos felt his sensory tendrils recoil instinctively, translating the shock of the human crew into Vexillan terms. This was something far older, far larger than anything they had encountered. "Ambassador, what is this?" Xylos demanded, his voice strained. "A countersignal, another civilization." Vance's eyes were locked on the rapidly decoding data streams. Her face, usually so composed, was etched with a dawning horror that chilled Xylos to his core. "No, arbitrator," she whispered, the revelation sinking in. "This is not a signal. This is a broadcast. It is a warning, woven into the fabric of spacetime, utilizing physics far beyond even our current capability. It appears to have been radiating since the dawn of this galactic arm." The Terran analysts worked frantically, racing against the clock of the data transfer. They managed to isolate the core message, a universal primer that used astrophysical constants to convey meaning, a history of the local cosmos, written by a civilization that vanished epochs ago. The message detailed the true nature of the cosmic entropy the Terrans and Vexillans had been fighting. It wasn't merely the random decay of the universe. It was a consequence of something far more sinister, an active, organized process. The message spoke of the scourge of the void, an entity or collection of entities that existed outside the familiar three-dimensional plane, utilizing the raw energy of collapsing stellar masses and temporal instability not for survival, but for directed consumption. The chronokinetic cascade that had nearly destroyed Vexilla Prime was not a natural disaster. It was an asterisk-feeding ritual asterisk, initiated by the scourge. The ancient broadcast revealed that the entity preyed upon systems that achieved critical technological stability, collapsing their spacetime to extract immense energy, thus inducing the cosmic entropy the Terrans had learned to fear. The impossible battleship, the Sentinel of Eon Asterisk, and the entire Ion array were built to counter natural disasters. They were entirely unprepared for a conscious, predatory threat operating on this scale. The revelation hit Xylos with the force of a 1,000-year gravitational wave. The scale of the galaxy shifted violently. Their local struggles, their philosophical differences, their massive technological achievements, they were all happening on the stage of an ancient, horrific cosmic hunt. The warning culminated in a single, devastating piece of information, translated by the Terran system as a coordinate marker. It was a point in space, far beyond the established borders of both the Terran and Vexillan spheres, where the ancient civilization had attempted its final stand. A last refuge, a place of ultimate defense. "The coordinates," Vance said, pointing to the projection, her voice heavy with the gravity of cosmic realization. "They mark the location of a structure, a final barrier built by this vanished civilization. They tried to build a structure that could survive the scourge." The ultimate twist was the existence of a common, sentient enemy that dwarfed all prior conflicts, and the existence of an ancient, abandoned megastructure that held the only known key to survival. Xylos looked at the human ambassador, seeing not a representative of a terrifying, unknown power, but a fragile, determined peer facing an unimaginable horror. The unity forged through crisis was instantly cemented by the magnitude of the shared, terrifying future. "Ambassador Vance," Xylos stated, his metallic scales reflecting the frantic light of the console, his voice resonating with a sudden, absolute clarity. The impossible battleship saved our world from an ancient predator's feeding ground. Now it must lead the way to the abandoned frontier. The Conclave stands unified with the Terran mandate. Our disagreements are irrelevant. Our combined purpose is clear. We locate this refuge, and we prepare for a war against the void itself. The philosophical reflection settled over the bridge like a heavy shroud. Humanity, feared and misunderstood for its impossible power, had inadvertently saved a sector not through conquest, but through the ethical dedication of that power. And in doing so, they had stumbled upon the true, silent terror of the cosmos. The impossible battleship, the Sentinel of Aeon Asterisk, designed to protect against entropy, now stood as the spearhead against the great organized darkness. Nothing was or could ever be the same. The age of local conflict was over. The age of cosmic vigilance had begun.